Hello, my name is Ivan Beck, and today I will be discussing a growing environmental issue facing Americans today. A problem that has not only local implications, but implications on a global scale as well. And what is this issue? The receding saline lakes of America, most notably the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Now, the Great Salt Lake is the largest saline lake in the Western Hemisphere, and as such, it is extraordinarily important, both ecologically and economically. So, what's happening to the lake? Well, according to a report titled Emergency Measures Needed to Rescue Great Salt Lake from Ongoing Collapse, which was released in January of this year, 2023, by a collaboration between different universities and organizations such as Brigham Young University, Westminster College, the University of Alberta, Friends of the Great Salt Lake Audubon, and many, many more. This report had reported that excessive water use and climate change is destroying the lake and has been over the past 40 years. Now get this. According to these researchers, the total consumption of the headwaters leading into the Great Lake by the surrounding people and institutions is 2.3 MAF, or million acre-feet per year, which, after natural and intentional forms of replenishment to the streams, is still a total net consumption of 1.2 MAF, or in better terms, 391 billion gallons of water a year, every single year. And the main cause of this? Agriculture. The study found that 74% of the water is being used for agricultural practices. Now, I'm not here saying that agriculture is bad and that it should be halted immediately. In fact, agriculture is one of the many marvels of society that's allowed us to grow and become what we are today as a species. And later on in the podcast, I'm going to discuss what measures the researchers recommended taking in order to alleviate the pressures on the Salt Lake. But for now, just bear with me. Now, direct human consumption isn't the only cause of the depletion of lake resources. Climate change is also having a severe impact on the Great Salt Lake. The overall rising temperatures have caused a huge increase in evaporation from this lake, and that accounted for 9% of the overall loss, which alongside human consumption only makes a bad situation worse. Now, of course, the lake decreasing overall is bad, but it's also having another unintended side effect. It's causing an increase in salinity of the lake, which has disastrous effects on the native wildlife, which is another topic we'll be discussing later. But as for the current status of the lake, it's not looking good. Just listen to the numbers from this same study. The overall volume of water from the Great Salt Lake has decreased 73% since 1980. A total loss of water from since then of 73%. And aside from that, there's an established minimum healthy level of the lake that it's only been at once since 2002. And here the scariest number reported of all. According to the study, the lake is set to disappear completely within the next 5 years unless a drastic change occurs. A devastating figure that only gets worse, especially in the terms of ecology. The Great Salt Lake is utilized by, or is the home to numerous species of birds, a sum of 338 individual species, and a total migratory bird use of equating to somewhere around 10 million a year. Many of these animals are so dependent on this ecosystem that any further decline might put them at risk for extinction. They're important for numerous egrets, gulls, grebes, ducks, sandpipers, cranes, coots, yellowlegs, and many, many more species. These bird species are at risk of losing the necessary and important habitat and the loss of their prey, brine shrimp and their fly larvae, which heavily depend on a stable salinity of the lake, and on the lake just being there in general. Alongside this, there's more consequences for losing the lake. Its shrinking boundaries are leading to an increase in dust storms that severely affect the surrounding agricultural lands and cities, including Salt Lake City, which is home to nearly 200,000 people. And not only will there be a disastrous increase in dust storms, but an increase in the toxic heavy metals and pollutants from the lake bed that the dust storms will be carrying out, due to them being exposed by the loss of the lake. These toxic materials and heavy metals include cyanotoxins, mercury, lead, and even arsenic. And exposure to these chemicals and other chemicals that are brought up by the lake being gone have shown to cause reproductive dysfunction, neurological degradation, cardiovascular damage, development issues, and cancer, which are all terrible for trying to maintain a population so based around the lake. And there's also another impact to these dust storms. They cause more snowpack melt due to the layering of debris on top of the snow. And this, coupled with the increase in temperatures, the snow is melting at an extraordinarily fast pace. And this isn't even mentioning the economic impacts that the loss of this lake can have. The lake provides 8,800 jobs to the people there and has a total value, economically, of $2.5 billion a year, all of which will be lost with this lake's destruction. So, the question being begged is, what's being done about this? Well, first off, a bipartisan bill was signed into law back in 2022 under President Biden, which helped allocate funds to the creation of a task force that brought together federal, local, and tribal governments, alongside various nonprofit organizations and local stakeholders, including farmers and landowners in general. All of this in order to come up with a solution together. And it allocated them $5 million in funding per year, which would last until 2027. But I ask, is this enough? I doubt it. But at the very least, it is a step in the right direction. There was also a mention of 5 other government bills being considered in Utah's Congress, 4 House bills and a Senate bill from 2022. And from my research on this, they had all passed. Now, these bills all had varying different impacts, one of which allowed for the voluntary return of waterland rights without the party losing stake in them, as well as allowing the water to remain in the stream without losing their water rights as well. A second one includes stipulations requiring the installation of water meters so that people know how much is being used, as well as one that allowed agencies to help, and I quote, assess, monitor, and improve management of saline lakes, which was in the Senate Bill 1466. There was also a state fund set up for efforts to renew the lake with a total estimated budget of $350 million, which was approved by the governor. Now, are these all useful to try and halt the loss? Yes, of course they are. The main problem is they might not be immediately. Hopefully, the benefits will be seen of all of these bills in the process before it's too late. But one thing I can say is that at least members of Utah's government are considering these conservation measures now, instead of them being ignored, which had been the norm previously, but it overall shows growth and an increased understanding of how significant and important this is. Now, the writers of this report had recommended steps to take in order to revitalize the lake and reintroduce water to it. The first of which was to increase funding for the conservation of this lake at all levels of government, federal, state, and local, as well as use existing federal resources in order to solve issues and come up with adequate management plans, particularly using the EPA and NOAA. Next was to encourage the public not to waste any resources and establish more long-term conservation plans than local small-time management ones to make sure it doesn't disappear before we have something. Then they wanted to reduce dependency on water designated for the Salt Lake by implementing various rewards for the adequate conservation practices and including tax incentives for reducing waste or using less water. They had also considered having governmental agencies at local levels encourage the citizens of Utah to use low or no irrigation vegetation for private lawns as well as public lands, which I think is a wonderful idea, and it might even highlight the natural beauty of Utah. They had also recommended a temporary measure to release water from emergency stores in order to help bolster the lake and give them a little bit more time. It takes a lot of hearts and minds coming together in order to save a natural resource as big as this, but it's very important, and it's going to take sacrifices. And seeing how the main use of this water is agriculture and how much they know that agriculture is important for society, they want to help the farmers in difficult times. They want to offer them rewards for less or no water usage, as well as the previous one that allowed them to not need to use all this water in order to maintain their water rights. And they wanted to make sure that farmers were getting something out of this as well, because their livelihoods are based off of this. Now, this begs the question again. Are all these enforcements and recommendations enough to stop the loss of this natural resource? I don't know. But I do know at the very least it's a step in the right direction. Given that their advice is followed, of course. But in the end, the researchers are saying that water usage needs to be cut by 30 to 50% in order to maintain the Great Salt Lake, which is going to take a lot of work. And finally, I'd like to thank you personally for listening to and learning about the Great Salt Lakes with me. And I hope you feel as passionate about the efforts that these wonderful people are putting in to conserve this beautiful natural resource. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.